There was no warning. One moment, Lab 7 was sealed, humming with routine diagnostics and low-frequency biocontainment pulses. The next, an internal pressure spike shattered the containment glass like it was sugar. The klaxon blared seconds too late. Caleb dropped his tablet mid-note and sprinted. By the time he reached the observation deck, the thick yellow gas had already filled the chamber below. He slammed his hand onto the emergency seal override, locking down the corridor. On the far side of the smoggy window, 2 security bots were dragging bodies out of the chamber. One large, slumped, scales still gleaming in the emergency lights, was unmistakable. The adult Xerathi female. The only one of her kind, left in active gestation. Caleb's chest clenched. "Where's the infant?" he demanded, breathless, turning to the nearest medical tech. The tech's expression stayed unnervingly blank. "There's no movement in the nesting pod. We're assuming..." "You're assuming wrong." Caleb didn't wait. He was already running down the decon ramp before the tech finished the sentence. The nursery module attached to Lab 7 was a sterilized cocoon of soft thermal lighting, kept at a precise temperature and moisture level. The curved bio-incubator at the center had just started flickering back online after the lockdown protocols forced a hard shutdown. Inside it, barely larger than a house cat, was the cub. Its breathing was shallow. Mucus clung to its snout, eyes still fused shut. The dorsal spine, normally stiff and reactive, even at birth, lay limp. Caleb cursed under his breath and peeled open the incubator's seal with a careful hiss. The cub didn't move. With gloved hands, he pulled it free and placed it on a warming pad. The body was light, disturbingly so. No vocalizations, no resistance. If he hadn't seen the faint rise and fall of the chest, he might have assumed the worst. 2 other researchers entered Gron, the administrative liaison from the Serani delegation, and Dr. Eska, lead xenobiologist. Both stopped in the doorway. "It's non-viable," Eska said, without a flicker of doubt. "Without the mother's enzyme priming during birthing, the immune cascade won't trigger. You know that." Gron nodded solemnly, voice dry. "Its weight is below minimum for a viable Xerathi neonate. The lungs are underdeveloped. The kin will not recognize it. There is no protocol for intervention." Caleb looked at the tiny creature, barely able to draw breath, and then back at the 2 figures in the doorway. "We don't have a protocol for most things until we make one." Eska gave a long, slow exhale. "Caleb, we've already logged the mother's death and submitted notice to the council. They've ruled the cub beyond salvage. It's cruel to extend its suffering." "Cruel," Caleb repeated, jaw tightening. "It hasn't even been an hour. There is no medical precedence for..." "Then I'll make one," he snapped. "Silence." Gron's frilled crest twitched in disapproval. "You will take sole responsibility then, no resource reallocation, no council support, and if the cub perishes, the matter is closed." Caleb didn't blink. "Fine. Put it in writing." Eska's eyes narrowed. "And if it survives? Then maybe you'll all owe it an apology." The first night was worse than he imagined. He converted a portable stasis crib into a makeshift NICU pod, modifying the atmosphere composition by hand. Too much oxygen, and the underdeveloped lungs would hemorrhage. Too little, and brain damage would set in before he could fix it. He'd have to adjust every half hour. The temperature had to be precise, but the heating array was too coarse, so he rigged a water bath system to cycle heat through a copper plate beneath the sleeping pad. Even with that, he had to swap out the thermal wraps every 2 hours to maintain proper skin contact. Feeding was another problem entirely. Xerathi milk had a triple protein bonding structure, completely incompatible with any mammalian substitute. The mother had died before colostrum could be harvested. Caleb had to pull molecular breakdowns from archived autopsy logs and simulate the key nutrients using lab-grown amino chains. The first formula batch curdled inside the cub's mouth. It choked violently for 7 seconds, that felt like a lifetime. The second batch was slightly better. By the 5th, the cub swallowed 0.5 milliliter without going into shock. He didn't sleep, not even in shifts. By morning, the vitals were stable barely. The heart rate was low, breathing labored, and hydration levels still flagged red. But the cub stirred for the first time when Caleb changed its thermal wrap. A weak paw batted at his hand. He sat back on the floor, back against the wall, holding a warm packet of formula and shaking from adrenaline, fatigue, and something else he didn't want to name yet. Hope. 4 days later, Eska returned. She stood at the doorway of Caleb's converted lab suite, arms folded. Behind her, 2 Serani aides waited silently. "You've lost weight," she said flatly. Caleb didn't look up from where he sat, coaxing the cub to take another few drops from the syringe. It now responded to his voice weakly, but consistently. The eyes remained shut, but it turned toward him when he spoke. "I haven't had time for full meals," he said. "Did you come to say I told you so?" "No," she stepped closer. "I came to see if it was still alive." Caleb didn't smile. It island, still fragile, still borderline, but alive. Eska's gaze drifted to the vitals monitor. Pulse improved. Heart murmurs reduced. Started oxygen therapy cycles yesterday. "You still believe this is worth it?" Caleb looked at the cub. A small, bony ridge was starting to rise where its crowned spine would eventually grow. The limbs, once limp and curled, now twitched when he adjusted its posture. It had even begun to whine a quiet nasal squeak, usually when left alone too long. "Yes," he said simply. Eska exhaled, rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Grons petitioned the council to remove it and end your experiment." "It's not an experiment." "You know what I mean. Tell him he'll have to drag it out of my hands." Eska glanced at the cub one last time before leaving. Her voice was quieter than usual. "It still has weeks, months of risk. Even then, what kind of life will it have?" "One where someone didn't give up on it," Caleb said. 3 weeks in, the first major setback hit. The cub nicknamed Ash, after the pale streak across its spine began wheezing. Not just mild, dry huffs. Full body convulsions with every breath. Oxygen saturation dipped to 72% within hours. Caleb ran blood gas analyses, throat swabs, and chest imaging. The diagnosis was brutal: early-stage bronchial infection complicated by undeveloped alveoli. It would take weeks to clear, even with aggressive care. He administered nebulized antibiotics and raised the ambient humidity. Every 4 hours, he suctioned fluid from the nostrils. Ash cried through the treatments, whining, clawing weakly, barely able to lift its head. Caleb held him through it all. The fatigue was a freight train. He began losing track of days. His hands trembled from caffeine and sleep loss. His back ached from sleeping in a chair. If at all. But each time, Ash breathed a little easier. Each time the heart rate steadied. It was like gravity lifted from the room. He didn't tell anyone when the infection finally broke on day 16. Just sat there, eyes wet, while Ash slept curled against his chest, breathing clear for the first time. Only then did he sleep. 4 straight hours. It felt like heaven. By the 2-month mark, Ash had tripled in weight. His eyes were open, reflective amber, always scanning. He still startled easily, but when Caleb walked in, he would lift his head and chirp. The bone scans showed promising calcification. He was eating better, longer feeding tubes first, then direct syringe lapping. Mobility was slow, but progress came. Ash could crawl 3 feet unassisted before collapsing in a tired heap. Eska returned again one afternoon and watched in silence as Ash tried to scale a small cushioned slope. Failed, then tried again. "You're shaping him like a mammal," she said. Not accusing, just stating. "I'm helping him survive," Caleb replied. "Whatever shape that takes." "Your methods are working. That's unexpected." "Unexpected?" Caleb said, raising a brow. "You took a creature designed to be forged in heat and blood, and raised it with blankets and patience." He didn't reply. Ash, finally victorious over the cushion, let out a satisfied huff and curled up beside Caleb's leg. Eska blinked. "He follows you. He trusts me." Her crest fluttered, a gesture he'd long since learned meant confusion. "I didn't think they could do that." Caleb smiled faintly. "Maybe you didn't give them the chance." Ash's first steps weren't graceful. They came with a wobble, a misstep, and a complete collapse onto the padded mat. Caleb had padded the enclosure floor with recycled medical foam. He'd learned the hard way that even a minor fall could fracture the cub's fragile bones. The first attempt ended with a strained leg, mild joint swelling, and a week of enforced rest. Ash didn't understand rest. He tried again. And again. The fourth week after the infection, Ash stood and walked 3 full paces. Caleb caught the moment on a monitoring camera. He didn't realize he was crying until his voice caught when he called Eska. By the 3rd month, Ash's size had doubled again. His bones, though still narrow and slightly bowed, were hardening. Caleb scheduled density scans every 2 weeks, monitored calcium absorption, and adjusted Ash's formula to support more protein bonding. Musculature came next. It was slow going. The natural predators on Ash's homeworld developed by stalking and pouncing almost from week 2, but Ash still tripped when turning too quickly. Caleb never pushed. He built obstacles from lab crates, hid food in puzzle dispensers, and spent hours coaxing Ash through ramps and tunnels. The cub's problem-solving improved faster than his coordination. He could find the scent packet hidden in a drawer. He learned to recognize sounds: Caleb's voice, the whir of the auto feeder, the door hiss. And when Caleb came back from food runs, Ash would greet him at the edge of his pen with a soft bark. Once, the cub brought a thermal wrap to the door as a gift. The edges were half chewed. Caleb didn't care. Tensions in the compound didn't vanish. Gron made 2 more formal petitions to confiscate the cub and redirect attention to viable research. The council meetings got ugly. Eska quietly removed her name from the project log entirely. Funding for Caleb's department was threatened. A few times, security bots shadowed his lab hallway longer than necessary. Caleb refused to budge. He restructured his shifts, cut personal hours, and began spending entire nights in the lab. Ash, now too big for the warming pod but too small for open roaming, was kept in a converted observation chamber, lined with traction mesh and low barriers. Caleb moved a cot into the corner, and often woke up to find Ash curled beside it, nose pressed to his wrist. He wasn't raising a pet. That would have been easier. Ash needed discipline. Boundaries. The cub was still Xyrothi. There were moments when instinct flickered through snaps of impatience. Growls during feeding, bursts of frustrated energy. Caleb handled them the way he would with a young human child: calm redirection, firm tone, withdrawal of attention when necessary. He never raised his hand. Ash learned quickly that snapping didn't get him food, but pressing a paw to Caleb's knee did. By month 5, the cub was learning basic commands: stay, come, drop. Gron visited again. The alien stood with 2 escorts and a passive recording drone, his long fingers tapping against the corridor rail as he watched Ash go through his puzzle dispenser sequence. He retrieves food from boxes. Fascinating, he said with 0 inflection. Caleb didn't answer. Do you expect him to recite mathematics next? No, Caleb replied, but I expect him to live. Gron narrowed his eyes. He is no longer a cub. He should be hunting by now, tearing through marrow. Your version is soft. Alive, Caleb corrected. Gron looked at Ash, who had now flopped onto his side and was noisily licking protein paste from his paws. He'll never be what he was meant to be. Caleb's voice was even. He'll be something better. At the 8-month mark, Ash suffered a fracture. It happened during a jump from the low railing. His hind leg folded the wrong way. The cry he let out sent Caleb bolting from the hallway mid-conversation. Ash was curled in a corner, panting and shaking, his left leg bent awkwardly. The fracture was clean mid-shaft, femur, but the pain left the cub nearly unresponsive. Caleb sedated him gently, ran a full bone scan, and consulted with the Xenoveterinary AI. Recovery would take 2 full months minimum, including 6 weeks in a brace, followed by physical therapy. Surgery wasn't recommended. Ash's bones were still ossifying unevenly. Immobilization would suffice, but only if Caleb kept him still. And Ash didn't understand still. It was the worst period since the infection. Ash whimpered often, tried to crawl even when Caleb held him down. He didn't want to eat. He lashed out once, swiped at Caleb in confusion. The claws left a deep gash on his forearm. Caleb didn't flinch. He cleaned the wound with one hand while cradling the cub with the other. After 3 weeks, Ash stopped fighting the brace. After 5, he stopped crying when walking short distances. By the end of the 2nd month, Ash walked with only a slight limp. The muscle imbalance would take more time to correct, but the fracture healed strong. Caleb logged every setback. Not one of the council members acknowledged the updates. A full year passed. Ash was now the size of a mid-sized dog, compact but lean, with strong limbs and clear eyes. The dorsal ridge had developed into a small crest that flushed slightly when he was excited. His gait was still unusual, slightly lopsided from early joint damage, but powerful. He could scale a wall mesh in seconds. His bite force had tripled. He no longer slept beside the cot, but across the room, watchful, quiet, independent. Yet when Caleb called, Ash came. The researchers couldn't ignore it anymore. They began watching. From the hallway at first, then from inside the room. Eska returned with a full medical team one afternoon. She stayed for an hour, watching as Caleb guided Ash through a set of behavioral cues. Turn, lie down, retrieve, stop. He listens like a service dog, she murmured. No. He listens like a student, Caleb corrected. Her eyes didn't leave Ash. He shouldn't be capable of this kind of structured response. This is not mimicry. He's choosing. Caleb nodded. He trusts. 1 week later, it happened. A minor power surge during a generator recalibration triggered a fault in containment lab 2 amperes. The shockwave knocked out 3 locks and released a class 4 spineworm specimen, barely a meter long, aggressive, territorial, and venomous. It didn't get far. But far enough. Caleb was walking past the lab hallway when the siren went off. The lights dimmed, doors slammed. He turned just in time to see the thing drop from a ceiling panel and strike fangs out. Pain ripped through his shoulder. He went down. Then a blur streaked past him. Ash. The cub, now a year old and nearly fully muscled, slammed into the spineworm before it could strike again. The fight was fast, brutal. Ash didn't just bite, he grappled, using weight and leverage, keeping the worm's tail pinned. He took a cut to the side but held on, jaws locked behind the worm's skull until the thing went limp. Security arrived 30 seconds later. They found Caleb half conscious, bleeding from the shoulder. Ash stood over him, crest high, growling low in his throat at anyone who stepped too close. He didn't back down until Caleb reached up and touched his paw. The injury required a 2-week stay in medbay. The venom had to be neutralized slowly. The tissue necrosis was minor thanks to the speed of the bite. Pain management was rough, but tolerable. The staff were, for once, cooperative. Eska visited daily. Gron did not. Ash was barred from the medbay for the first 3 days. He broke the barrier on the 4th. No one stopped him. He curled beside Caleb's bed and refused to leave. I suppose we should have named him something more dignified, Eska joked once. You never expected him to live, did you? Caleb smiled through the pain. I hoped. Ash let out a small huff and rested his head on the blanket. You didn't just save him, she said. He saved you. Call it even. She turned away thoughtfully. No, it's not. Not yet. 2 years passed. Ash no longer looked anything like the frail bundle Caleb had cradled in a thermal wrap. Now, over 4 feet tall at the shoulder and nearly 6 feet nose to tail, the young Zirathi moved with confident, fluid power. The once wobbly gait had evolved into a measured lope. Though he still carried a subtle limp from the femur fracture, it no longer slowed him. His musculature was dense, his reflexes fast, and his intelligence bluntly intimidating. To those who had once dismissed him, Ash was no longer pitiable. He was a problem. The Alien Council, once indifferent, now requested monthly reports. Gron had gone silent, replaced by a younger, more formal liaison named Dirac, who visited with tight smiles and took obsessive notes. Caleb didn't trust him. Ash didn't either. He watched Dirac during every visit, not with hostility, never aggression, but with a fixed, unreadable stillness that made the aide visibly nervous. That same week, the message arrived from the Jurathi. A delegation of bloodkin. En route. It's ceremonial, Eska explained, standing beside Caleb in the central lab's observation deck. The Zirathi Council of Kin conduct status checks on all viable offspring once they reach maturation benchmarks. They're coming to test him, Caleb said flatly. She nodded. They will assess his strength, reaction time, scent memory, and more importantly, temperament. It's not just about survival, it's about identity. Caleb exhaled slowly, arms crossed. He wasn't raised in blood pits or wild forests. He learned puzzles before pouncing. That's not going to impress them. They may see him as changed, not necessarily improved. He's not a test subject. Eska didn't argue. Be ready anyway. Caleb looked down through the glass. Ash was chasing a motorized scent lure through the obstacle course. Not for food, not for show. For fun. They have no idea what he is, he murmured. The Sirathi arrived 3 days later. 6 of them, 3 elders, 2 guards, and 1 observer. A black-crested female named Sen Thi, who introduced herself with formal precision and didn't hide her displeasure at the setting. She looked over the station walls, sniffed the recycled air, and didn't speak to Caleb for the first hour. Ash met them in the central observation chamber. He did not growl, he did not bow. He stood still, eyes locked on the eldest male, whose body bore ritual scars and claws filed to knife points. The elder Threx stepped forward and inhaled deeply, analyzing scent cues. Then, after a long pause, he let out a low growl. He smells like food paste and artificial sleep. Caleb stepped forward, pulse climbing. He smells like survival. The elder didn't respond. Ash didn't move. The tests began that evening. First was scent recall, identifying marked objects based on olfactory markers. Ash passed instantly, nose twitching as he selected the correct set of blocks, even distinguishing between 2 compounds with similar base chemistry. Next was reaction time. The guards set up a holographic predator simulation, complete with false scent, motion blur, and acoustic bait. Ash responded with rapid lateral movement and a preemptive strike, targeting the simulated spine with precision. Senthi narrowed her eyes. That strike pattern is not native. No, Caleb said. It's anatomical. He studied bone scans, knew where to aim. Third was strength. A weighted sled was placed on the training floor. Ash watched silently as the guards dragged it into place. The elder gestured and barked a command in Shirathi. Ash did not respond. Use the common tongue, Caleb said. Threx sneered. He was not born for soft syllables. But he repeated the command. Ash approached the sled. The harness was too crude for him, but he gripped the lead ropes in his teeth and braced. Muscles bunched. He pulled. Not once, not twice, but across the entire platform length, paws slipping slightly on the mesh, but never faltering. When he released the rope, he turned and stared directly at the elder. A silent question hung in the air. Enough? Threx did not answer. Then came the final trial. The challenge of blood. Caleb wasn't informed until it was already being set up. They brought another juvenile, Eska said grimly, walking into the lab with her lips pressed thin. Same age as Ash, same species, trained in traditional Xyrathi method, born to hunt. They want him to fight? Caleb's voice rose. They want to see if he's one of them. No. It's not your call, said a new voice. Dirac. He stood in the hallway, holding a datapad with an authorization seal. The Sirathi bloodlines are sovereign. You signed away objection rights under the interspecies clause when you took full responsibility for the cub. Caleb grabbed the datapad and slammed it into the wall, hard enough to crack the screen. That was never a license to turn him into a weapon. The fight was set in the training dome. 2 observers. No weapons, no interference. The Sirathi juvenile entered first, larger than Ash, heavily built, scales lined with faint ritual scarring. He growled, postured, stamped the ground with heavy paws. A show of dominance. Ash entered second. He walked slowly, without tension. Not fear, not uncertainty, but awareness. He circled once, then stopped, head tilted, watching the other creature. The bell chimed. The other cub struck first. A powerful leap, claws aimed at Ash's shoulder. Ash rolled, dodged, twisted underneath, and shoved with his hind legs. The other cub skidded back. Caleb's breath caught. The next exchange was faster. The challenger rushed in with a faint bite combo standard predator tactic. Ash didn't react like a trained fighter. He reacted like someone solving a problem. He stepped aside, twisted the opponent's forward momentum, and shoved the cub face first into the dome floor. Then, he stepped back. Not a single bite, not a single wound. The challenger scrambled upright, confused. Again, Ash waited. Again, the challenger lunged. And again, Ash deflected this time, pinning the opponent by the crest and holding for 2 seconds before releasing and backing away. The third time, Ash didn't even move. He stood still and let the cub snarl, pace, circle. Then he sat down. Caleb felt his chest clench. He's refusing. Not out of fear. Out of choice. The bell rang again. Trial complete. Ash turned, looked toward Caleb through the dome wall, and waited. The silence in the review chamber was suffocating. Scifi finally spoke. He did not injure his opponent. No, Caleb said. He didn't need to. He refused the ritual. He won it. 3 times. With control. That is not the Sirathi way. Caleb's voice was low but firm. It is now. Threx stood slowly, glaring at Ash through the glass. You made him weak. Caleb didn't move. You left him to die. Threx turned. Ash, on the other side of the glass, rose to his feet and growled, not loud, not feral. Just one short, sharp sound, a warning, not a challenge. Then, he walked back toward Caleb's corridor. Scifi's expression shifted slightly. Her voice was unreadable. He shows restraint, discipline. Threx didn't reply. The younger Sirathi counselor leaned forward. It is not what we expected. Caleb said nothing. He didn't need to. Later that evening, as the delegation prepared to depart, Scifi approached the lab one final time. She stood at the doorway while Ash slept curled on the mesh platform. His chest rose and fell in slow rhythm, eyes twitching slightly in dream. You shaped him, she said softly, with patience instead of fear, with consistency instead of pain. Caleb nodded. I raised him the way I'd raise anyone. She looked at him, head tilted slightly. You think that's enough? I don't know, he admitted. But it worked. She lingered, then extended a clawed hand not toward him, but toward Ash's enclosure. I will report him as unorthodox, not unworthy, she said. Caleb exhaled. It was more than he'd hoped for. As she left, he sat beside the enclosure and reached through the mesh. Ash stirred, shifted closer, and rested his head in Caleb's lap. He wasn't a blood cub. Not anymore. He was something else. The official council report came 4 weeks later. Caleb read it while Ash napped under the main console, his tail thudding softly every time a background audio cue chimed. The file was unceremoniously labeled XIR 101, a divided by Ash status determination, conditional acknowledgement. The bureaucratic language was careful. Too careful. Ash was not rejected but neither fully accepted. The subject displays anomalous social cognition, non-native behavioral modulation, and atypical restraint, inconsistent with kin combat doctrine. However, functional traits, resilience, strength, spatial acumen, surpass expected thresholds. Subject is classified as viable. Integration, optional, with observation. Optional. Observation. Caleb stared at those words for a long time. They couldn't say Ash was one of theirs, not completely. But they couldn't deny what he had become. He closed the file and leaned down, ruffling the fur between Ash's neck ridges. The young Sirathi yawned, stretched long, and blinked up at him with amber eyes. Caleb smiled. They don't know what to make of you. Ash chuffed, then trotted to the puzzle station and dropped a chew toy in the receptacle like it was part of a sacred ritual. The project, once starved for resources, now attracted attention from all sectors. Eska's department was suddenly flooded with grant offers and collaboration requests. Xenobehavioral teams wanted to study Ash's development. Comparative physiology groups proposed tracking his genetics against baseline Sirathi profiles. Someone even floated a proposal for cloning. Caleb threw that one straight into the recycler. Not everyone was subtle. Dirac returned smiling too much, now and offered Caleb an expanded team, 3 interns, and directional freedom, if he agreed to document methods for cross-species infant imprinting protocols. The offer came with a thinly veiled implication of future commercial interests. Caleb declined. "I didn't raise him for replication," he said. "He's not a prototype." Dirac didn't understand. Or pretended not to. "He's proof that adaptation is transferable. That emotional bonding supersedes genetic instinct." "Do you understand what this means?" "I do," Caleb said. "And that's why I won't sell it." He signed off from the central research database that evening. Ash grew more independent over the next months, though he remained bonded to Caleb. The once tiny cub now had a full-range enclosure that extended into the biodome. He hunted simulated prey, climbed vertical challenges, and spent hours perched on the observation platform, overlooking the starscape projection. Still, every night, without fail, he returned to sleep beside the cot in Caleb's quarters, head resting on a blanket he'd stolen as a juvenile and never returned. Caleb, for his part, began planning for what came next. Ash couldn't live in a single room forever. He was too smart, too capable, but the idea of releasing him into Xyrathi territory was unthinkable. Even if the kin accepted him, their world wasn't built for creatures who used restraint before violence. Caleb met with Eska in the Arboretum late one cycle. "You ever wonder what kind of adult he'll be?" he asked. Eska sipped her tea, watching Ash's shadow pacing along the mesh outside. "Every day. He's not just a new generation, he's a new type, a bridge species." Caleb nodded slowly. "That scares some of them." "It should." "One?" She looked up at him. "He loves you. That's not programming, not scent imprinting. It's learned attachment. The fact that he's not human makes that all the more remarkable." Caleb didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted to where Ash had finally flopped down, stretching in the filtered sunlight. "I'm thinking of taking him off station," he said quietly. "Somewhere remote, open terrain, less surveillance." "Retirement?" "No, something like a sanctuary, where he can keep growing, on his terms." Eska was silent for a long moment. Then she reached into her satchel and handed him a small data crystal. "Coordinates: uninhabited moon, partial atmosphere, old terraforming site. It's quiet." Caleb took it without a word. She stood. "Just tell me before you go." Departure came 1 month later. The council didn't try to stop it. They didn't approve it either, but by then Ash's file had become a bureaucratic paradox, too controversial to endorse, too high profile to shut down. Caleb filed the transfer as a field study. No one asked questions. He packed lightly. Ash needed only a few things: protein dispensers, climbing structures, and a reinforced thermal nest for the shuttle ride. Caleb brought a crate of logs, the blanket, and a few essential tools. The shuttle was old, retrofitted, and noisy, but serviceable. Ash stepped onto the boarding ramp without hesitation. He didn't look back. The moon was quiet. Not lifeless birds had taken to the tall grass, and the terraforming lichen glowed faintly at night but unburdened by cities or scanners. The horizon was clean, open, wide enough for something wild to stretch without consequence. Caleb set up a small habitat unit, low to the ground, half sunken for thermal insulation. Ash roamed while he worked, tested every slope and crevice, marked territory with playful snarls, then returned to nose at the fireplate until Caleb fed him a smoked protein strip. The first week was slow. Caleb kept a detailed journal, noting Ash's new sleep patterns and the gradual change in his stride. Less cautious now, more assured. The stars here were clearer than on the station. Every night, Caleb sat outside the habitat dome while Ash lay beside him, gaze tracking the skies as if remembering something he'd never been told. One night, during a cold snap, Caleb awoke to find Ash draped half across his cot, trying to share warmth without crushing him. He laughed, then cried. 3 months later, a comm beacon flickered alive in orbit. It was Eska. "Just checking in," she said, her smile wry. "Station feels quieter without you." "We're well," Caleb replied. "He's thriving." She hesitated. "There's been talk, not from me, higher-ups. Suggestions to reassess the Xyrathi program, maybe even reclassify them as non-predatory. You know what that means?" He did. Reclassification meant integration, study, possibly domestication. It meant using Ash as a model, as justification. I raised him to be himself, Caleb said, not a reason. I figured you'd say that. A pause. Caleb? Yeah? You did it, you proved them all wrong. He looked over at Ash, who was currently trying to balance a branch on his snout for reasons known only to him. I didn't prove anything, he did. Years passed. Caleb aged slowly under the filtered sunlight of the moon. Ash grew taller, leaner, more deliberate. His crest developed fully, the patterns on his scales deepening into complex mosaics. He could track wind changes before they happened, could open lock latches with a flick of one claw. He could still be playful, still whine for attention or curl beside Caleb's bed, but he was no longer a cub. He was something the universe had never seen before. One evening, after a long trek to the ridge, Ash returned with a strange bundle in his mouth, a hollowed piece of bark filled with bright stones. He dropped it at Caleb's feet. A gift. Caleb knelt. What's this? Ash huffed, tail twitching. Decoration? Caleb guessed. Ash let out a short, satisfied growl and lay down, watching as Caleb arranged the stones into a ring. All right, Caleb said softly, we'll keep it. The wind picked up, stirring grass and ash and memory. There had been a lab, once. Cold. Sterile. Unfeeling. Now there was only this quiet air, a fire's crackle, a creature no longer alone, and a man who had refused to let life be decided by numbers and protocols. They had called the cub weak. And maybe he had been. But weakness wasn't destiny. Ash wasn't the strongest of his kind. He was the first of something new. And that had always been enough.